I'm Yusuf Shmu. I'm the Vice Provost for Research here at Rice. I want to welcome everyone on this fine occasion that celebrates and honors the contributions of Professor Moshe Vardi in building, expanding, and providing the visionary leadership of the Ken Kennedy Institute for many years now. And we're going to go more into that when we hear from our historian, I think, in a few minutes. As we approached transition of Moshe from leading the Ken Kennedy Institute to leading in his new role in the Rice Initiative on Technology, Culture, and Society, I wanted to be sure that Rice University and the Office of Research in particular recognize his spectacular efforts on all of our behalves to lead the Ken Kennedy Institute. And in his new role, in his new initiative, he'll be actually helping us to understand the ethics and societal implications of technology, which is something which I think we all agree we are in desperate need of, because the world is changing and it's changing more rapidly every single day. And I can think of no one better suited to telling us what that all means than Moshe. And if you haven't already read some of his important articles and editorial pieces on this subject, I would encourage you to do so. He's already opened my eyes to many, shall we say, deficiencies and regulatory gaps in our current policies, which I think are good reading. I also want, where is Moshe? Where did you go? Oh, there you are. He also wore a tie today, which, again, historic moment. He looks good. He looks good. Don't discourage him. I also wanted to be sure and mention my genuine and strong feelings of affection for Moshe. He is a true intellect and philosopher at a time when we desperately need compassion, strength, and character to get us through each and every day, it seems. And I think the panel of people that are going to come and speak to you about Moshe, we've all worked with him so extensively over the years and value his wisdom above all other things. His passion works too, but I like the wisdom sometimes more. With that, I would like to introduce David Leibron, president of Rice University, to come forward and speak a few words on, about Moshe and his interactions with Moshe. David Leibron has served as Rice University's 7th president since 2004, a period which has seen remarkable growth in our institution, from a fine undergraduate educational institution to being a fine undergraduate institution and outstanding research university. So we've grown a lot over the last few years under his leadership. David is a native of Philadelphia, where he was a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. He served on the Ninth Circuit. No, he doesn't want me to hear any more of him about himself. He wants to talk about Moshe exclusively. I will say that I will not yield the stage to you and say that David has been a remarkable and wise leader of our institution, has worked with Moshe a lot over the years, and the Ken Kennedy Institute in particular. And so I know that he also values all the work we've done together with Moshe. With that, I welcome David to the front.
So those weren't exactly the instructions I got. I think actually I was told the opposite. Don't talk about your interactions with Moshe. So I got here about 15 years ago and met this man with a mustache who was humble, unceasingly optimistic, gently opinionated. And I knew I was going to get along with Sid Barris. And then I had the opportunity to get to know Moshe, who has had, not just on the university, but I think on me, remarkable influence. And really, it's the result, I think, of a couple different things. One is just a kind of tirelessness, and the other is intellectual curiosity. Now, since I realized this was going to be largely, not exclusively, a group of scientists and engineers, I thought I would at least have a tiny bit of data on it. So I looked at Twitter, which is where some of us get our data. Moshe has made so far, this is maybe not counting the last 45 minutes, about 25 tweets today. I then went and looked at the timeline of the tweets. The last tweet from last night was at 1:47 a.m. And the first tweet of this morning was at 4:16 a.m. So we now understand how he can be sending us all of this information, at least in my case, about the world. And much of that really concerns a whole range of issues across higher education. It is a reminder, I think, to us, and Moshe is really a constant reminder of how important intellectual curiosity is to our endeavor. Now, I will say one of those tweets at 2:22 this afternoon, so there are no excuses for this. It's about an hour and a half ago, was Moshe passing on this article about, this, I'm not making this up, why are engineers so narrow-minded? New research has an idea. Now, I will say the person who wrote that article probably never met Moshe Vardi. You could say many things about Moshe, but narrow-minded or lack of intellectual curiosity or being confined to some box is certainly not one of them. He has inspired us, poked us, challenged us in ways that are really essential for any great university. It is, no doubt, in some ways a loss that he is moving on from the Ken Kennedy Institute. But he is engaged, as you know, in the new endeavor. Will be leading the initiative on technology, culture, and society. Now, I went back, I hadn't paid enough attention to the announcement at the time, but I really wanted to read this. It says, Rice University computer scientist Moshe Vardi is stepping up his game. Apparently, as you move into culture and society, that's what you do as an engineer, is you step up your game. Now, I want to sort of conclude with just a sense of how important that I think this is. And I think probably all of us have had encounters recently with the benefits of technology, the challenges of technology. I came back from India a few days before Christmas through Newark Airport and was greeted with something I'd never seen before, which is rather than having to stick my passport into a machine, it just had some facial recognition. Didn't want my passport, instantly gave me, for the first time with my global entry, I actually didn't get the giant X across the slip because apparently my face matches me and my fingerprints do not match me. And I thought this was actually a pretty great thing from my perspective. And then I got home and started hearing some news stories about what universities are doing with the Bluetooth technology that we so value, namely, is spying on their students to understand, are they in class? How many hours are they spending in class? Are they going to the library? Are they eating their meals in the dining halls? And that I found a little bit frightening, to be honest. So I think the issues that you are taking on as you move into a new stage of your career, a new opportunity to bring wisdom not only to the university, to the world around us. So I join in this celebration and thanks for all you've achieved in areas that are vitally important to the university and will be carried on, I am confident, with equal enthusiasm and commitment as you did. But I want to thank you for, it's so important that those of us so deeply steeped in the knowledge of our technology turn their attention to its consequences. Those of us who are less steeped have things to add, but we can't do so without the participation of those who understand this at the very deepest level. And that has to involve all of us from every part of the university. And so, Moshe, I want to thank you for all you have done over the course of your career, whether in your discipline or outside your discipline, to being a true citizen of the university. And we join in celebrating this transition. Thank you.
So our next two speakers are Neil Lane and Melissa Keene, who are going to come to the front and tell us more about Moshe. As you know, Neil is a senior fellow in science and technology policy at the Baker Institute. He's also a professor of physics and astronomy emeritus here at Rice University. Prior to that, Neil served in the federal government as the assistant to the president for science and technology and director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Melissa is a historian, so she's the Rice University Centennial Historian since 2005, researching and preserving all aspects of Rice's history. In fact, just before this started, she told us a very interesting story about something she found on the way to looking into Moshe's, I guess, records here at Rice University. And I think, it's interesting when you bring a historian into an event like this, because at times like this, historians, we think, they're looking into the past, but historians are really good at synthesizing how the past influences the future. So I think it's very nice to have a historian here who can reflect a little bit more broadly about the Ken Kennedy Institute and about Moshe's involvement here at Rice University. So with that, I'd like to bring them up to the front here and let them have a shot at Moshe.
Yeah, it turned out that the file folder right next to the folder about Moshe was really, really interesting. So we were asked to talk a little bit about sort of the context of the history of the centers and universities at Rice. Where did they come from? And it's a little surprising to think about when you look at the landscape out there today. The rise of centers and universities at Rice was actually, once upon a time, part of a coherent intellectual project. In essence, what happened was this. George Rupp came to Rice after Norman Hackerman in 1985. And when he got here, he did a couple of really smart things. The first one was hiring Neil Lane as provost. The second one was, you gotta remember, when Rupp comes here, it is like we are going into the bottom trough of the oil bust of the 1980s. So he is hired to move this university forward as dramatically as he can with no money, right? So he looks around for ways to squeeze more out of what we have here. Some of these ways worked, some of them didn't work. One of the things that basically worked was he looked at the single institute that existed at Rice when he arrived here, and that was the Rice Quantum Institute. The Rice Quantum Institute bubbled up during the late 1970s as faculty members in physics, in chemistry, in electrical engineering, who had research interests that sort of touched each other in molecular physics, kind of got together and began working together. It became an official institute in 1979, and it was the only one that was here when Rupp arrived in 1985. Well, he looked at that and he said, and this is a new idea, by the way, at the time, it could actually be to our advantage to have a small faculty if we organized them in ways that they could get into the cracks between disciplines in sort of a more organized way. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. As I said, the RQI bubbled up from underneath. These other ones were created from above. Now, why they did that, it's hard to explain. So I'm going to turn the mic over to someone who was implicated in these decisions.
Thank you, I think, for that introduction. I remember, first thing I want to say is that all Rice presidents have contributed enormously in transformative ways to the development of Rice University, including our current president, who's still doing it day by day. I worked more closely with George Rupp as his provost, and that was the period in which the institutes were created, so that I'll comment on that period. I first met George when he called me one day. I was in Colorado. I was a chancellor of one of the University of Colorado campuses. He called and said, could he fly up and have a chat? Well, yeah, sure. So we had a chat. Most of the day, we talked about why he came to Rice, what he was learning at Rice, what his vision was for Rice, its future, where he thought we could make a big difference working together. He had this idea based on his knowledge of RQI, and of course, by that time, he'd had a chance to know Ken Kennedy, to know Rick Smalley, Frank Tittle. I mean, many of the rest of you, Ron Stebbings, who's not here today, not on campus, and many others. So he understood what was going on in the Rice Quantum Institute. And so he had this idea of ecological niches. It's kind of that brings to mind the image of a pond, or, and there's some insects and some fish and alligators and snakes and the birds and stuff around, and they're all living in this ecological environment. And we had a chat about that. I pointed out that when he thought that centers and institutes could be ecological niches. But in a pond, some ways that some species contribute to others is by being eaten. And that's not really the idea of the center and the institute. So I think the analogy is okay, but it only goes so far. But that he kept talking about ecological niches. So this is George Rupp's ecological niches. So he created 4 new centers, and then RQI continued. Center of Bioscience, Bioengineering, Center for Cultural Studies, City, Center for Information Technology, Institute. Some were centers, some were institutes. It didn't make a difference on the wording. And the Center for the Study of Institutions and Values. He wanted centers in different parts of the campuses that went better in some parts of the campus than the others. I have a slide I sometimes use, a picture of St. Jerome with the arrows sticking in him, the caption. Well, so, Dean Mattis, how did the faculty like the new institute idea? So it did, not that necessarily the humanities faculty were less cooperative than others. In fact, it was remarkable how cooperative the whole university was to George's vision, what he wanted to do. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But you can find the footprints, you can find the traces of all these institutes that have evolved in many cases to today. So the Baker Institute, extraordinarily successful under the leadership of Ambassador Ed Jurigian, can be traced back in some way, all the way back to the Center for the Study of Institutions and Values and the faculty that were involved. And the Humanities Institute Center can be traced back to the Center for Cultural Studies. The Institute for Biological and Biosciences and Engineering, very successful, very strong. Cities evolved into the Ken Kennedy Institute. So evolution has occurred. It's been 30 years. Why do I look so young? It's been over 30 years since we were doing this sort of thing, so things do change. Second thing I would say is that my perspective on centers and institutes changed some when I went to Washington. I had a number of years at the National Science Foundation before I went to the White House. Had a chance to see centers and institutes all across the nation. Many of them fail, some succeed. And so I sort of developed an idea about what it is that makes a successful center. And I just picked 3 things. One, just outstanding faculty who attract outstanding students to do the work of the Institute. Second, I would say support, a nurturing environment. I mean, financing, much of which will come from the federal government, facilities, sometimes very desperately needed. And then I would say friendly policies. So those are my 3 F's, if you like. Friendly university policies, including academic departmental policies, where that's often a challenge when a new institute is born. I think City, Ken Kennedy Institute's had all those. And the last one I would say, at least as important as the other, is vision and leadership. Ken Kennedy gave the city the leadership, the vision and the leadership, and subsequent directors, Sidney, Willie Zonapol, Moshe, followed on with strong leadership, Moshe for over 20 years. So Moshe, I want to congratulate you on your extraordinary contributions, not just to the intellectual side of the campus, but as David has said, the intellectual side of the campus, driving through your curiosity, impact on all of our abilities to serve the institution in broader ways. And And we really look forward to working with you on this new initiative at the Baker Institute. It's something we really want to be doing, and certainly will do that. So there are a lot of words could be used to describe Moshe. Some of them we've already heard, and we'll hear more. But the phrase civic scientist I've used because we have many civic scientists on the campus and other civic-minded scholars who engage the public, who get involved outside their own disciplines while also contributing to their field of study. Moshe is a civic scientist, and I think, if not unique, special in many ways, because whatever he does somehow with more passion. I would say gusto, maybe is the right word. That has enormous impact. It allows you to move mountains, we think, on the policy front as well, and that's why we look forward to working with you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
For the next part of our talk, we're going to have a panel, which is going to be Reggie Deroche is going to come introduce the panel up to the front of the room. I think you all know Dean Reggie Deroche is the William and Stephanie Sick Dean of Engineering here at Rice University. He previously served as the chair of at the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Georgia Tech. And now he's our incoming provost, so he's now my boss, so I'll have to be super nice. But with that, I'd like to bring Reggie up to the front to sort of take over from here.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'll first introduce Moshe. I'll say it's hard to be brief with Moshe if you look at his CV online, and this is just a shortened version of it. So I'll briefly read out a little bit of your accomplishments and then say a few remarks, and I'll introduce the other panelists up here. So Moshe is the university professor at Rice and the Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor of Computer Engineering and director of the Initiative on Technology, Society, and Culture, Technology, Culture, and Society. He previously served as the director of the Ken Kennedy Institute, as you all know. He chaired the CS department at Rice from 1994 until 2002. Prior to joining Rice in 1993, he was at IBM, where he managed the mathematics-related computing science department. His research interests include database systems, computational complexity theory, multi-agent systems, and design specifications and verification. He received his PhD from Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1981. He is the author and co-author of over 600 articles, as well as 2 books. He is the recipient of numerous awards, and I'm only going to read out a few, including 3 IBM Outstanding Innovation Awards, the 2000 Gobel Prize, the 2005 ACM Canalicus Award, 2006 LICS Test of Time Award, 2008 ACM PODS Test of Time Award, the 2008 Blaise Pascal Medal for Computer Science by the European Academy of Sciences. He is a recipient of the 2011 IEEE Computer Science Harry Good Award, 2012 EATS Distinguished Achievements Award, and the Southern Universities Research Association 2013 Distinguished Scientist, 2017 ACM Presidential Award, 2018 ACM Church Award. He holds 7 honorary doctorates. Is it 7 or 8? I know every few weeks I see a new one coming in. Is it 7 or 8?
7.
It's 7, all right. He's the editor of several international journals and senior editor of the communications of ACM. He's a fellow of the American Association of Advancement of Science, of the American Mathematical Society, the Association of Computing Machinery, the Association of Advancement for Artificial Intelligence, the European Association for Theoretical Computer Science, the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics, and he is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Science, as well as the American Academy of Arts and Science, and the European Academy of Sciences, and Academy Europea. My first meeting with Moshe, which was one of the early meetings I had when I started around 2.5 years ago, I recall Moshe just pretty much telling me everything I needed to know to be a good dean at Rice. Actually, I don't recall
It
quite.
served you
I don't
well.
recall quite getting a word
Good
in
work.
during this meeting, or subsequent meetings for that matter. However, looking back, most of the things he said were actually quite right, so he really gives good advice. Everyone knows he's a brilliant computer scientist. His record speaks for itself. He's obviously well-versed, as President Lebron noted, on a range of topics from history to politics to literature. In fact, he's giving a lecture on the Hungarian Holocaust at the end of the month. I wake up in the morning knowing that I'll have 2 to 3 links from him on interesting stories. Often they're on how computing is taking over the world, but he's been diversifying lately from a variety of topics. I'm actually disappointed when I wake up and not get a link from Moshe in the morning. One of the things I've come to appreciate is how much Moshe really loves Rice and what an incredible role he's played in shaping the department and many of the faculty on the department and so many other things on campus. So Moshe, your leadership will be missed, but I suspect you'll continue to do great things and we'll continue to learn from your wisdom. So please come on up for the panel. I'd like to introduce Sid Barris. Everybody knows Sid, who's a research professor in ECE, a senior strategist for Connections, the Maxfield and Oshman Professor Emeritus of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and Dean Emeritus of the George R. Brown School of Engineering. So Sid, why don't you come on up also? And I believe Jan is coming up also. So everybody again knows Jan, who's the executive director of the Ken Kennedy Institute for the past 18 years. So come on up, Jan. Am I giving you the mic?
Yes, I need a microphone. No, I'm in. Sydney doesn't need one. So.
I appreciate it, and thank you, Reggie. And I'll try to kick this off and get started here if I can get my notes. But one of the things, 18 and a half years ago, Moshe, you interviewed me. And I remember that, and we had a good conversation because that was prior to me arriving at Rice and starting to work with you. And one of the things that I wanted to kick this off with, and I'll let Sydney chime in afterwards, but it's hard for me to imagine you as a child, but I'm going to do it anyway. What were you like? What did you want to be?
Just like I'm now. Except without the masters. So actually, I think it's very difficult for every person to really kind of, I can visualize myself as a child because there are pictures, but to really know what were you like as a child, actually, I think it's a bit difficult. I was very naughty. My father used to call me, it's a Yiddish phrase or German phrase, Oi berchuchem, it's a Yiddish phrase. It really means smartass, or smarty pants. I did more polite. So he thought that I had a really big mouth. I once asked him something like, I was about 6 years old, and I asked him, what is better, democracy or dictatorship? And he said, of course, democracy is better. Then I said, so why are you making all the decisions here in the family? So this gives you a little idea what I was like.
Well, along the same lines, asking about your roots, I know that you grew up on an Israeli kibbutz. How did that help form who you were and who you are? So a kibbutz, for people who don't know, is a cooperative settlement. It was, if you want, like an Israeli kolkhoz. It was a cooperative settlement in the Soviet Union, but this was voluntary. This was a socialism in the small experiment that started in the beginning of the 20th century and kind of died towards the end of the 20th century. It was a kind of a century-long experiment that in the long run did not succeed. One of the things that was a hallowed principle for the kibbutz movement was to free the women from the labor of having to raise children. So there were children's house, and all the children grew together in a house.
it turned out it was incredibly, as much as the attempt was to liberate women, it was very unpopular. Yeah. And the kibbutz where I grew up decided in the early 50s to abolish that practice. So I grew up actually at home. So like the usual semi-normal nuclear family. On the other hand, it was small. There were about 50 families in the kibbutz. So you knew everyone. Everyone knew you. I'm still getting used to big cities. Okay? I'm still getting used to big crowds because I grew up where, it was like one really takes a village. It was really everybody was involved in the project. It was out in the country. So we would just, I had to walk maybe 100 meters and I was in the wilderness, so to speak. So I think it was a wonderful place to grow up.
Well, I think most of you know that I was the director of the previous organization called CITI, Computer Information Technology Institute, and was part of a discussion that took place when the whole institute system, which, as Melissa pointed out, we had one institute, and then this system grew up. And it particularly, I think, fit Rice, because Rice already had a bit of a community spirit, and it kind of fits in with maybe some of your own background. But having done my PhD at Stanford and having spent a year pretty heavily involved with the academics at MIT, I saw what really competitive systems look like, where your different disciplines are really siloed and people did not talk across boundaries. And at Rice, I had, partly through the college system, being an associate at a college, I met people in history and sociology and physics, as well as people in electrical engineering. So when Moshe came, it somehow there seemed to kind of fit that some of his interests and some of the Rice culture seemed to fit better than it would at many other universities. And I also wanted to ask, how you partially answered, how do you think your parents would have described you as a young person? How would your spouse or your son describe you?
I wouldn't dare go to my spouse. I'll have to ask her quietly. She's sitting somewhere in the back, so I will ask her very quietly how she describe me. Probably everybody would say mild-mannered, soft-spoken. No?
Yeah, just the Moshe that we all know and love.
At least to my parents, I think I was pretty much a handful yet. So, but on the other hand, the nice thing about going to kibbutz was that you got tremendous amount of freedom. So it was incredibly safe. So I would basically come home from school and have lunch and do my homework. And I tell my mother, I'm going out. That's it. Mm-hmm. And she would have no idea where I would be going. And she just said, just be home for supper, on time for supper. And in this between, we did incredibly naughty things.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a good place to be.
Before we leave your childhood and growing up, I have one more question, and then we'll move on to other things. But I believe you told me at one point that your dad always wanted you to be a rabbi. And so what was his reaction when you chose to go to college and pursue physics, because you studied physics first, and what was the hook that got you into computer science?
So I come from a long chain of rabbinical family. So I was destined to be a rabbi, but my heart was never in it. So I had a kind of a deal with my father, and the deal was that I would go for 1 year to rabbinical seminary, and if I decided then that I don't want to do it, then I can go to college. And I really wanted to do, first of all, my passion from high school was physics. And I did major in physics. I'm a physics major. But just at the end of high school, just when I finished high school, I saw an advertisement in a newspaper for a programming course, a 2-week long programming, kind of like a boot camp, a 2-week boot camp on programming. And I think now what would attract me to do it? Because we had no idea what computers were. You didn't see computers. There were no. There were computers somewhere, but it's not something that you saw in daily life. You had no. You didn't hear. Nobody talked about it. Somehow it intrigued me, and I took the course, and I learned to program in Fortran. And now people look at Fortran, this old language. I loved it. It was love at first sight. So it was at the time there was no major. You couldn't major in computer science in Israel. There was no major yet. But Bar Ilan University, which I went to, had a minor. So I majored in physics. Physics normally did not require a major. It was called an extended program. So it was like a combined major and minor because it was so intensive. But I took on top of it, I took a minor in computer science. And I did my college education before my military service. And when I finished my military service and I decided I go back to graduate school, then I had to make a decision. And then it was very clear, it's going to be computer science, sorry physics, goodbye physics. I have no regret.
So I know briefly after college you also did work as a programmer for a while.
No, I work during, not after college, during college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you still write code?
I must admit, I have not written code in many years because I have many wonderful students who are here, and I write code at a very high level. Let's put it this way.
Like this?
But I wave my hands and they understand what I'm saying. I'm like conductor, But I used to love actually assembly programming. So when you do assembly programming, it's like you're standing in your boots inside the registers. And to move data, you're picking the data and move it there. You're really inside the computer. Today, high-level programming doesn't give you the same level of being embedded in the machine.
Do you think leadership can be taught? That's a dangerous question, since some people have already made decisions about that. But as a successful leader, how much of that can be taught? And how much of it do you just have to find a person who has it and hire them?
So the way, I developed as a leader is first of all actually in the military, okay? And that included at the end the apex of military career was the battery commanding officer in a war. And the way leadership is taught is, I don't even remember any class on leadership per se. It's all by example and by doing.
So it's more of an apprentice. An apprentice
So
system.
in officer training school, there are exercises, and you get to role play an officer in command of something, and then you get later feedback on how you perform. And so you have to do something, and then you get feedback on it. But I'm trying to remember whether anybody told us, okay, here are the three, principles of leadership. Here's the formula, authority divided by responsibility equal accountability. I don't remember anything like that. It was all by having role models and by actually doing things. So by the time I came even to industry, I had behind me, it's a different type of leadership in what you have in the military than you have in industry, and even that's different than what you have in academia. And one has to learn, move between cultures, so to speak.
Well, how surprising was it to be inside of an academic institution, since you had never done that before? So except as a student.
So to me, actually,
how surprising was that?
So to me, the surprising thing is the level of, I would say, people don't realize it, but when you meet a group in industry, the people are usually much closer emotionally to each other than people in academia. And there is a reason for that. It took me a while to understand it. There is a reason for that. So first, even a department operates as a small democracy. That means you have to make decisions, and people have different opinions. So there is more contention. People have disagreements. I remember in computer science, sometimes very big disagreement. You have a tenure case, which tears people apart because you're making a huge decision, and people have different opinions. In industry, usually you have much less contention because you don't have the same decision-making power. Also because management has more power. Usually in industry, you have a common enemy. This is management. Yeah. And that's bind you together. So in a way, you actually create friendship that are tighter than I would say that people here. I have lots of collegial relationship, but I still have many good friends from the IBM day where we had common enemy. And here, even disagreement with the president is not the same as when you have management.
So when you arrived at Rice, to take the computer science department of the chair, Ken Kennedy was here, and we have the namesake of it, and he was seen as a leader. What did you learn from him, and was he a role model? Was that somebody you knew before you came? How did that work? And I know that CS department and CRPC was somewhat tension within that groups.
So when I said that I was going to Rice to become department chair, people said, "Oh, there is someone who is a bit greater than life, Ken Kennedy." Ken was very easy to work with. That was actually part of the secret of his success. And he said, "It's not that I don't have ego." He said he was very open about it, but I did therapy, so I have perspective on my ego. That's the way he described it. As opposed to some people that I won't mention, he says, it's not that their ego is bigger than mine, but they don't have the perspective on their own ego like I do. Yep. So Ken actually was very easy to work with. Somehow people warned me it's going to be difficult to work with Ken. Ken was a pleasure to work with. Ken asked me, we talk and we reach an understanding. He says, "I don't expect you to always do what I say, but I expect you always to consult me." I said, "I think that's a very fair deal," and that's what we did it. We talked. We became good friends. We had agreements. We had disagreements. But part of his secret, what he has done, the thing that he done for CRPC was kind of a little bit, what was it called? A team of rivals concept. He basically said, "Okay, I'm going to go in this area. Who's going to be my competition?" So he made a list of who are going to be all the competitors, and he brought them all together. And so he formed a dream team that they kind of couldn't lose because it was such a strong team. Mm-hmm. So you could learn. Ken has amazing social skills that I'm still working on my social skills, and apologize for all the people who has to bear with me. I'm still learning along. But Ken had amazing. You can see him kind of operate a room and chair a group of really people with big egos. He was a master at that.
Yeah. So you were department chair for many years. How was that? Did that prepare you, and how is it different to have been director and stepping into the director of the institute?
So I was department chair for 8.5 years, and a year and a half before the end. So it was in 2000 January, towards the end of 2000. The dean Sidney called me and he says, "We need a new leadership at City, Computer Information Technology Institute there." I said, "What about the department?" He said, "We'll find someone." It took a year and a half, so I was doing the dual role for a year and a half, which was actually quite a lot to do. But eventually, Keith became the chair. basically, pretty much on the last day, on June 30th of 2001. One or two? One? Two, I think. Basically, Sid called Keith to his office and says, "You're the chair." Very simple, you're the chair. So what is the difference? So people ask me, what's the difference between institute director and department chair? So as department chair, you have to deal with myriads of details, including, I would tell people, I explained to them the difference was, we had a bathroom on the northeast corner of the 3rd floor, and it was perennially leaking. And eventually we decided to call a plumber. And Darnell, who was the department administrator, and the plumber and we had a meeting in the men's room. Darnell was shivering. She said, "I've never stepped into a men's room before." I said, "It's okay. Just come in here. The smell is worse than the ladies' room, but you can handle it." So we go there, and the plumber shows me how there's no leak. He flushes the toilets, everything is fine. And I look at it, and I look at him, and I look at the toilet, and I realize there is a difference, and I ask him, "Please sit on the toilet." He said, "What?" I said, "Please sit. Keep your pants on, sit on the toilet." So it sits on the toilet, and then I flush it, and it leaks because it was a wall-mounted toilet. So only when he sat on the toilet, then there was a leak.
A real engineer. A real engineer.
That's my physics major. That's my physics. So that's what you have to do in department chair. You have to deal with lots of problems. As institute director, I don't have to deal with it. If there is a leak in the toilet, I say, Jan, please handle the leak.
There's not been a leak I have to deal with, but there's been a lot of other.
No, so there is, in some sense, a department is a production unit.
Yep.
You educate students, you employ, you do personnel cases for faculty, and part of your job as department chair is the machine has to run. Mm-hmm. You have to hire faculty, you have to promote faculty, students have to graduate, courses have to be taught. You can almost think of it as an industrial unit. Institute is very, very different. It's programmatic, and the agenda is completely up to you. Mm-hmm. So, there is much less, I would say, of this operational responsibility and much more need of, okay, what do we do? Because there's nothing written down what you're supposed to do. It's all about what you envision to do. Department, it's very clear what you have to do. You have to run the business of the department.
So to follow up on that briefly, and did you have a grandiose vision stepping into institute director? And on one side, we talk about institute being research institute. We don't, as institutes themselves, we don't do research. The members do research, so the institute are to support them. How did that shape your leadership and how you approached being a director of the institute?
So the thing about this institute is they have incredibly vague mission. This has not changed. The vision is very, very vague. You can go look at the history and look at the documents. We have done some exercises, and we see some of the things were realistic, some of the things were not realistic. But I came in, and in fact, in the early period, it was this before we hire you. Tony Ilam, who was the executive director, was his way out, and it was really not completely clear what is to be done here. Mm-hmm. So everybody said institute. Excuse me. But what was concretely to be done was not clear. Mm-hmm. And so I started talking to people, meeting with faculty, and pretty much says, what is your pain point? Mm-hmm. And the pain point that lots of people mentioned was research computing. People said research computing, partly there was an early period, there was a mainframe, and that's where people do research computing, and then the mainframe was decommissioned, and people said, oh, now you can use workstations. And basically, IT got out of the research business. This was the policy. IT does not do research. And everybody was saying, well, it's just fell on us. What do we do? And so, in fact, I went to Ken and asked for his opinion on that. And Ken says, don't get into what we call big iron, kind of really bringing lots of hardware on campus. It's a pain in the neck. And he was right, as we all know. It's a colossal pain in the neck. And I decided that's what had to be done, because the idea is everybody's going to manage their own computing needs, what's clearly not working for people. We have to go back to a central solution. And that's where we kind of embarked. This is really was until basically the last year or so, where finally you and Clara worked with Kathy Collins and to try to get finally RISE to go and start funding some of these things. We had to operate for almost 20 years entrepreneurially, going because there was no money. Go raise money, go find the money. Scrape the money from NSF, from NIH, from industry, get the money, and we raised probably over this period about $25 million to create. So mostly I think what the Institute did is not research, but Institute serves as a research enabler. Really, faculty do research. And you can tell faculty what research to do, and whenever we try to do it, it's like taking a cow to the water. You can take a cow to the water, you can make the cow drink, okay? Or we call it sometimes pushing a rope. Mm-hmm. So the most effective thing that we could have done was create enabling conditions for people to do research.
Mm-hmm. I think, what is our wrap-up time?
A few more minutes, and then we can.
Well, one of the things I wanted to just share with you, just looking around this audience here, reminds me of the difficulty one has in hiring somebody who is better than oneself. So it's trite. Everyone has heard that. No, No one wants to hire somebody better than themselves because then that makes them look bad. And that is a pressure. It really is a pressure. But if you can sort of get beyond that pressure, there's sort of nothing more satisfying that I look around and kind of see the number of people that either I hired or I was influential in their hiring and thought they've worked out remarkably well. And then you can say, I was okay, but these newer people, they're a whole lot better. And I keep thinking, on one hand, that Moshe is a peer. He's my daughter's age. And I just kind of, oh my gosh, look what he has done. And what had I done at that age? And I just thought, yeah, but I contribute to hiring this guy, and contribute to hiring that guy over there, and several others around the room on the search committee for Ed Derigian. And I just think, we've done okay. We've done okay. And I like this format of where one can talk about things like this rather than just the pure lecture format. And I think it worked quite well when we did this earlier. And this is actually your idea, this fireside chat, of having more of a conversation in front of people and seeing a different aspect of not only that person, but the people around them. So shall we open it up?
I do want to actually go on to one more topic before we open it up. Okay. Because one of the things that you've done, Moshe, and I'm really impressed because you've been blogging a lot. I mean, it was mentioned earlier that you do post a lot and whatnot, but at what point did you realize that publishing journals or conference articles were not necessarily reaching the audience you wanted? And what is there some transformative, and what advice would you have anybody else that may have ambitions of becoming a blogger? And as a footnote to that, why is Facebook your chosen medium?
Oh, the answer to that is very simple. I joined Facebook because my son was on Facebook and I want to see what he's up to. That is very simple. That's how I started with Facebook. So that's where he was. This was the way to spy a little bit on my son. And I remember when I went on Facebook and then I sent him a friend request. And I think this was, I don't usually send friend requests. I think this was the last one I sent, just once. I sent him a friend request. And then he was quiet for about 3 days. And then he sent me email. He said, "Okay, I'll accept you." And I'm sure it affects what he put on Facebook, but such is life. That's how I got started on Facebook. But just on a comment on blogging, actually I don't blog. It's not a fair description. What I do is I write columns for communication of the ACM. About the social media, people say, when do you have the time to put on social media? Putting stuff on social media takes 2 seconds. You click. Reading the stuff, that takes time. To put on social media, that takes no time. But I became, in 2008, I became editor-in-chief of communication of the ACM, which is the flagship publication of the association. And it was traditional that the editor-in-chief writes a column every other month. So I said, okay, that's job description. So I have to write a column. So it's actually, you can go to this now, it's the whole collected, it's called, if you just Google under Vardi's Insights, fancy name, you see that the first few columns are really just about because the publication was in fairly poor shape, and my job was to revamp it, to revitalize it. It was called revitalization, revitalize it. And so the first few columns you can see, they're all about the magazine itself. Mm-hmm. So I write 1, 2, 3, and then it becomes clear, well, you can't just keep writing about the publication. You've kind of said what you have to say. And you need to say something else. So I start, in computer science, we're very unique that most of our publications happen in conferences, not in journal. Published mostly in conferences. And so I wrote a column on conferences versus journals with some criticism of the system that we have. And that column kind of suddenly went viral, and you get just enormous feedback. And it just realized, wow, this has 100,000 readers. I can write something. Doesn't matter how stupid it is. 100,000 people will read it. So first of all, I better write something that makes some sense, because 100,000 people read it. And you know, I kind of gradually, I would say, I would develop a kind of an editorial voice, kind of writing about things. And again, it was first more kind of computer science centric. And if you can look and you can see the evolution, how it gradually become also, I bring kind of the societal aspect into it. The beginning was sometimes technical, sometimes semi-technical, but you can see gradually how over time I said, well, okay, I have other opinions. I have a forum. That's right.
So with that, why don't we take some questions from the audience and
Yeah.
see? And
At the very end, I'd like to say a few words.
okay, so you want to close out at the end. So if we have a microphone here, could Michelle come over and run a microphone? Let's see here. So do we have any questions from the audience here? Okay, we have one over here. So I'll take that one.
I don't have a question. I just want to say something that essentially going to thank you, okay? During my life, as I look around and I see Neil Lane and Sid Burris and David, I learned a lot from these people, okay? And you know, Sid, you impacted me a lot. But I want to go to you. Now, when I was on the National Science Board, Shirley Malcolm taught me how to disagree professionally, okay? She was, you know, we disagreed. Now, some people think I may not have learned well, but I did. But what I learned from you and Ken Kennedy, in the same way, was how to promote other people and enjoy their success. Okay, you did that really well, and Ken Kennedy. Ken nominated me to National Academy, and when I was elected, he called the House, and I wasn't there. And he talked to my wife, and he says, Richard's been elected. So Gene tells me, Ken Kennedy called and said something good has happened. Call him back. I didn't call Ken back. And so Ken called later that night and said, Richard, something great has happened. You didn't call me. Ken was actually more excited than I was about being elected to the National Academy. And Moshe, you've done a lot of that, of promotion and enjoying the successes of other people. And I thank you, and I also thank Ken for doing that so well.
So I have to say this, I give partly credit to IBM. Because IBM, it was actually very explicit role of a manager to promote your people. It was very, very clear. It was part of the job of a manager, promote your people. And that training, and in fact, when I came to Rice, and I still think we have a problem, that is not ingrained in people, part of the job of anybody who is department chair and dean, and everybody is, you know, basically when we promote the people here, of course, they benefit, the career benefit, but ultimately the whole institution benefits because the recognition is out there and the credit kind of spills around. And I still think that Rice could do a better job at it.
Question here. Question here.
Chris.
I'm going to get stuck and stand up. So I can say a lot of things. Thank you for convincing me to be an academic and not be a foreign service officer. Sorry, Mr. Ambassador. But I have a question that I've always wanted to ask, and I see you so involved in our society and public policy and things that most computer scientists, I don't really hear a lot about. And the question I had is, how did you become an American? When did you become an American? So multiple questions, because you were always the first person to ask a question, so yeah, I'm used to hearing a lot of questions from you. But what is the odyssey that made you not just an academic, not just but identifying true, you know, completely as an American as well as a citizen of the world?
So let's separate the two questions. About becoming American, I have to give credit to my wife. I had a green card, and I had to, after 10 years, you have to renew the green card. And she said, well, since you have to do this bureaucracy, you might as well become citizen. And I had some emotional issue with it, because it, you know, you kind of renounce some other loyalty to become an American citizen, but she convinced me that it was the right thing to do, and she was right, and I have, well, sometimes I have a regret lately, but don't tell anyone. But there is, in the Talmudic literature, there is one book that's called The Saying of Our Fathers, and it's a collection of wisdoms. And one thing that really kind of really is, you can think of it as a Jewish ethos in some sense. It says, if I'm not for myself, then who is? So first take care of yourself, right? The oxygen mask first goes on you. If I'm not for myself, then who is? But if I'm only for myself, who am I? Okay. If I'm only for myself, then who am I? You can finish the work. You cannot finish the work, but you have to get started. And it means that if you say, okay, I have to do something for the whole world, it's overwhelming, right? The amount of work you can say, well, there is no way I can fix the world, right? There is, in fact, there is a well-known, it's called the voting paradox by economists. Why do people vote? So yes, of course, you're having some influence. But if you look at your expected return given your small influence relative to the effort that you have to make, economy says it is irrational to vote. But of course, if we all behave rationally, then we won't have democracy. So the same, you can't really you can fix the world. The problems are so large. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to do your effort. And I think this is a summary for all of us, you know. If I'm not for myself, then who is? But if I'm only for myself, then who am I? And there's a lot of work. You can finish it, but you've got to get started.
And you have a question back here?
Actually, I have two questions for you, Moshe. Number one, what is computer science? And number two, what are the essential qualities of the computer scientist?
I have one question for you, Matt. What is? So there are people who do the philosophy of computer science. This is a subject matter. When I was a postdoc, I spent 1 year at Stanford at the Center of Study of Language and Information, and they had philosophers and linguists and computer scientists. And I remember sitting in some meeting in which they were debating what concept of water does a robot have? And I said, who cares as long as the robot can swim? And what I mean by that is, take for example mathematics. There is a joke. People say, what is mathematics? The answer is, that which mathematicians do. So my view is the most important things in life actually define a rigorous definition. Starting with life itself, love, just think how many beauty, how many things that you all we agree, they are very important. If you try to define them, you find they are very, very difficult to define. So there are people who are debating exactly what is computer science. I never got myself that involved in this debate. We all know that there is a phenomenon called computing. And, you know, people are debating, is it artificial? Does the universe compute? You know, there are kind of people who debate the philosophy of exactly, is it a natural phenomenon? Is it just artificial phenomenon? I'm less bothered by that. As long as we do what we are doing, and I'm happy to live with ambiguity. The same way, you know, the most fundamental philosophical question is, why does the universe exist? I'm willing to run along with it.
So with that, I know you wanted to make some closing remarks. I think that I don't see any eager hands up. So Moshe, it's your platform.
So this, I have to say, this feels a little bit as if I'm in a funeral, and this is the eulogy here. So it's amazing, you know, we have a sense of colleagues and friends, and I have here many people who played a critical role in bringing me to RISE. Neil Lane was the provost, Sid was then the chair of ECE. Some of these people, unfortunately, are not with us anymore. Malcolm Gillis was the president, Michael Carroll, who was dean, Ken Kennedy, who was not the chair, but he was, as we said, he was kind of a bit larger than life. All these people played a key role in bringing me to RISE. I'm grateful for all of you for coming here, and I'm grateful for Yosef for organizing this, and for David for his very kind remarks. Thank you very much.